And this is the bathroom of the room that we stayed in, this wonderful woman's apartment that was near the synagogue. And, they didn't have water, they didn't have electricity, they didn't have gas. It was all on and off. It was controlled by the Serbian extremists. And so, we had a water emergency in Boston a couple of weeks ago. It was nothing like this. This was it. You didn't know when you were going to get water again. So you learned how to kind of bathe in about a cup of water, brush your teeth with a teaspoon of water. And this is the gas. This is how they got heat. I remember the women in Croatia, I asked them how they got heating, and they talked about freezing in the first winter. They said the second winter was a little bit better because it was organized and they started to introduce gas into their homes. But that introducing gas is, you can imagine how it was without any equipment necessary for that. And they took some pipes from buildings that were shelled and not used and plastic hoses, and they were taken from one house to the other through the window. And every now and then comes an explosion because, with this kind of introducing gas, you can't have normal way. And so every now and then people get killed because there's an explosion. In addition, the extremists, natural gas doesn't smell. You add mercaptans to it, and the extremists stop adding mercaptans. And they would let people in Sarajevo have gas for 24 hours a day, and then they'd cut it off. And so you kind of knew you were on a cycle, but you didn't know when the cycle would start or stop, and you had to be very careful to turn off your gas. And if you didn't, boom. And so you can see that's where the gas was connected, where we stayed. And there's one other thing. Does anybody notice something really kind of ironic in this picture? It's Tito. Everybody still had their Tito pictures up. It was just very special. Oh, and that's our gas line, too. That was one of the things that made me nervous about going to Sarajevo was... yeah, you can go on. This is just a typical building. You can see none of the buildings had glass. They were all covered with UNHCR sheeting. And this is the library in the background, the library that was burned with, Jamie, what's the element? Magnesium mortars? Phosphorus mortars in August of 1992. There's more of the library. They are rebuilding it, so it is the library. And this is the librarian, Enes Kuyundzic, who came to the United States for help. He was a great, dapper guy. And he took me to the library, and we got to climb around the rubble like a couple of 3-year-olds. And then he walked me back down the river to the Jewish Community Center. And the head of the Jewish community was just livid that he took me walking down this street because that's where the snipers can see you. I did tell you about that, Jamie, didn't I? Okay. I love the humor in Sarajevo. I mean, the Sarajevo people were just so fabulous during the war. That says half sail. And we were taking pictures one day, and this woman just walked up. She wanted her picture to be taken. She didn't say anything. She just stood there and smiled. Now look at this. This is 2.5 years into a war, and she's wearing a white coat. How do you do that? I have just so much admiration for her. And here's a typical view. The snipers were in the mountains, so you never knew where you could, you knew where you couldn't walk. You didn't know where you could walk. This is one of those famous bread lines that we heard all about. Well, we were in Sarajevo for 5 days. We had 4 meals. They were really good. This is what they call a rosette. This is what the pavement looks like when a mortar shell hits it. Here's another one. And I think they've left them in the streets of Sarajevo. This is the Jewish Community Center, the old synagogue. It's not the old synagogue, but it's the synagogue that they moved all of the work of the Jewish community into. And this is Tsitsko. Tsitsko the cook, he was such a cool guy. He cooked every day, 2 meals a day throughout the war. Now, one thing that I don't know was well understood in this country was that all aid was distributed by religion. If you were a Croat, the Catholic Church helped you. If you were a Serb, the Orthodox Church helped you. If you were a Muslim, the Red Crescent helped you. The Jewish community was the only community that distributed aid and food to whoever needed it. They did not distinguish. Tsitsko ran a soup kitchen that served 350 people 2 meals a day, and there wasn't a need for that within the Jewish community. He had 4 things that he cooked: rice, beans, pasta, and peas. And he would make different soups, and of course coffee was very important. And every once in a while they would get canned tuna or meat, and he would make a soup out of whatever. And he cooked. He had a stove that used electricity, and a stove that used gas, and a stove that burned wood. So hopefully he'd be able to cook, because you didn't always have any of those things on any given day. This is Tsitsko. Tsitsko got married when we went back a year later. This is his wedding. Oh, this is sort of a typical, this is from '96, yes. This is my second trip. This was after those infamous Dayton Accords were signed. This is sort of typically how most of the buildings in Sarajevo looked. And this is an old Muslim cemetery. The extremists really tried hard to hit it with mortars, but they kept missing. And I love the old Ottoman-looking tombstones. They're just fabulous. Oh, and here's just another view of Sarajevo. This was from the first trip in the winter. And this is, anybody want to guess what this building is? It's the main, what? It's the main hospital. We didn't see the emergency rooms, but I would imagine they looked worse. And the slide before, we don't need to go back, was the view from the mountains. So that was how easy it was for them to get to the hospital. This is the head of the hospital. We brought, on our second trip, we brought new scrubs, and he thought it was great. They only had like the green ones, and we brought scrubs the first time, and people were upset we brought other colors. He thought it was fabulous. He's got a lot of bullet holes in his office, but oh, and these are the towers that I showed you before. And these pictures are taken from a school that we visited when we went back in '96. This is the bunker in front of the presidential headquarters, the presidential whatever it was. On our first trip in 1995, Elsie and I met Alija Izetbegović, the president of Bosnia. And, you know, this is probably the only time in the history, in European history, when it was advantageous to be Jewish. When we met with Izetbegović, he said, "We've had major support of the Jews throughout the world when it comes to the issue of Bosnia. I was asking myself, how come we have such strong support of the Jews while the others are hesitating? The Jews understood much more than many other nations the significance of tolerance, the significance and importance of religious and national tolerance." I think you could add Antiochians to that. This is the school. That's a view from the classroom. This is an elementary school. They kept going throughout the war. They were very proud that only a couple of the kids were killed coming to school. It was unbelievable. This is the Holiday Inn where all of the journalists stayed. This doesn't really show you the parts of it that were blown up. Sarajevo. Oh, more of the great graffiti that they had. Well, this is in the school playground because those are the towers right behind it. Oh, and they have these 2 wonderful posters, which we don't have to have in all our elementary schools, how to recognize landmines and mortars. There's one, and there's the other. Some of the kids. You know, it's just what they lived through. Here we are on our second trip to Sarajevo with the proceeds of our second shipment. We took pictures of, we collected stuff from all over the country, and we wanted people who collected it to know that it got there. And so we took pictures of the boxes. We asked all the Hadassah groups to work with their local churches and mosques and whoever wanted to do something. This is the former head of the Jewish community of Bosnia-Herzegovina, and this is really one of my other favorite slide. There was a store in Boston that went out of business, and they gave us all of their old clothing. And I picked it up in my giant mommy van, and my van was full, and I dumped it in our living room, and a friend of mine and I were sorting through and packing. And she came across a pair of silk boxers, and we thought it was really, just so surreal that we were sending silk boxers to the war zone. And then she found a pair of Mickey boxers. And we laughed so hard, we just fell down on the clothes. And I promised her that when I got to Sarajevo, I'd find Mickey. So this is during the war. So we fly into Sarajevo, we get to the Jewish Community Center, and there's the head of the Jewish community who I had yet to meet. We're very dear friends now. And he's holding this pair of boxers up, and I screamed, Mickey! I said, I have to have this picture. He said, my wife will not like this. More of the stuff after it arrived the second time. Oh, just, what you saw on the street in '96. Oh, how late am I? How over am I running?
You're just about on schedule, so you
How many?
can more minutes.
Okay. Yes. So when we went back in April of 1996, we were there for the first Passover Seder that the Jewish community had. The Jewish community had been split because of the river. On this side, you were stuck on the Serbian side versus the Bosnian side, and the community couldn't get together. So they had two Passover Seders, and the Seder they had a morning Seder. And the first gentleman with the red beanie is Vinko Puljic, who was the head of the Catholic Church in Sarajevo. He's now Vinko Cardinal Puljic. The gentleman in the middle is the head imam of Bosnia, and the gentleman to the far right is the representative from the Serbian Orthodox Church. So not only could the Jewish community come together, but all of the other communities came to join. And that's the woman that I stayed with on 2 trips, and we're holding Tito. One of the things that I didn't say is that the Bosnian Ministry of Health estimated that 50% of all of the medicines and medical supplies brought into Sarajevo during the war were brought in through La Benevolencia, the Jewish community. They had a lot of help from communities in Amsterdam, not just Jewish communities, but they were recognized as doing good work because they gave to all people who were in need, regardless of who they were. I want to leave you with one thought. I could leave you with 10, but I want to leave you with one. Going to Bosnia during the war was really, it was a privilege. And I was only there for 5 days, and like I said, Antiochians don't tolerate whining well, and I'm not trying to whine. But it definitely changed me going to some place where I could leave, but other people couldn't. Seeing what people lived through. And I think it's just important that we may not be able to complete a task, but we always have to try. I think now of the kids, our soldiers, who come back from war zones and the condition that they're in, and the refugees who are living in our country who have been through these wars that we brought to them or responded to, take your pick. And I just think it's important for us all to be mindful and helpful of people who have lived through wars. Thank you.